Lipids are a group of organic molecules containing fats, oils, cholesterol, and some hormones. They are long chains of carbon bonded to hydrogen and are called hydrocarbons as a result of that structure. They are hydrophobic as a result of those long chains of carbon and hydrogen. So take a moment to answer these two questions. Since they're hydrophobic, does that mean that they are soluble in water? Does that mean that they are polar? Okay, hydrophobic means water-fearing, so no, lipids are not soluble in water. They do not dissolve in water, and that's a result of being non-polar. So no, they are not polar. And you're familiar with the hydrophobic nature of oil if you've ever added cooking oil to water and seen the clear separation like in this picture. Ducks take advantage of this property of lipids by waterproofing their feathers with oils to keep water away from their skin. The first group of lipids we'll consider those that serve as energy storage molecules. Now, lipids make excellent energy storage molecules because they yield over twice as much energy than carbohydrates when they're metabolized. And these are the fats, which are used by animals. You can see these fat-filled cells in animal tissue here. And the oils typically produced and used by plants as their energy storage. Now, the basic unit of fats and oils are triglycerides. This isn't quite the same as the monomer-polymer system of the other group of organic molecules. But let's go over their structure now. Glycerol is one part of triglycerides. The other is 3 fatty acids, you can see here. And these molecules undergo a reaction that forms water and bonds those 3 fatty acids to the glycerol molecule, making what we call a triglyceride. Now those R groups at the end of those fatty acid chains just refer to any number of carbons that could continue on. Okay, so take a moment again to see this reaction and answer this question. What kind of reaction is this, a dehydration or a hydrolysis reaction? Okay, this is a dehydration reaction, and you can tell that because we have formed water. So we've pulled the water out from these molecules, and in doing so we've made a molecule. Remember, dehydration reactions are the reactions that form molecules. Hydrolysis reactions are those that break molecules apart. Saturated fats are saturated with regards to the amount of hydrogens in their fatty acid tails. So you can see how each of these carbons is holding the maximum number of hydrogens that they possibly can. And because of this linear arrangement, it gives the substance a higher melting point and tends to form solids at room temperature, like a stick of butter. Unsaturated fats, however, will have one or more double bonds in that fatty acid tail, and you can see that where this double bond occurs, there's a kink. It bends the geometry of the molecule. And because of that bent geometry, they cannot stack up as neatly as they can in the saturated fats, and thus that lowers their melting point, and these tend to form liquids at room temperature. Phospholipids are an incredibly important biological molecule because they're a major constituent of our cell membranes, and they are composed of 3 major parts. One is a phosphate group, shown here in this red circle at the top. And then the glycerol molecule that we just saw as part of triglycerides. But now there are 2 fatty acid chains attached to that glycerol. The 3rd carbon of the glycerol is attached to the phosphate group there. And again, you see one of these tails typically has a double bond in the carbon chain, and you see that kink again down there in that fatty acid. Now, because of all those oxygens bonded to phosphate in the phosphate group, that is what we call a polar head. There's a polar end to this molecule, and then the fatty acid chains, as we saw in the triglycerides, make it a nonpolar tail. Now, typically we'll see phospholipids represented as this kind of round ball of a head with 2 tails coming off of it. Phospholipids compose our cell membranes, the outer surface of our cells, and because of that polar head and that nonpolar tail arrangement, they arrange themselves into what we call a phospholipid bilayer. So you can see here, if we picture one side of this bilayer pointing to inside the cell and the other to the outside, those polar hydrophilic heads interact with the aqueous solution that is present in our inter and extracellular fluid, while the hydrophobic tails point to the inside because they are not soluble in the water. Finally, steroids are an important group of lipids that are different than the structure we've seen in the previous two groups. They have these 4 fused carbon rings, such as in cholesterol. You can see those 4 fused rings very nicely in this molecule. Cholesterol is also an important component of our cell membranes, embedded in that phospholipid bilayer. And it also serves as the precursor to important sex hormones like testosterone in males and estrogen in females. Again, you can see those 4 fused carbon rings very nicely in those 2 hormones.